The first thing Marguerite Miller noticed about the cowboy standing on her porch in the sweltering July heat of 1882 was that his hat was on backwards, and he did not seem to realize it. She stood in the doorway of her small clapboard house on the edge of Panamint, California, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, studying the tall figure who had just knocked with such unnecessary force that her windows rattled. "Yes?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced politeness of a woman who had learned to guard herself carefully in the 3 years since her husband died in a mining accident that left half the town in mourning, and her with nothing but a piano, a house, and the determination to survive. The cowboy, who appeared to be somewhere in his late 20s with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of summer grass, removed his backwards hat and clutched it against his chest. "Madam, I heard tell you give music lessons." Marguerite tilted her head slightly, assessing him. He was broad-shouldered and lean, with the weathered look of a man who spent his days working cattle under the merciless California sun. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed from hard use. There was something earnest in his expression that made her hesitate before responding. "I do teach piano and voice," she said carefully. "Are you inquiring for a child, a sister perhaps?" "No, madam." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and she noticed his ears were turning pink. "For me." This was unexpected enough that Marguerite found herself stepping back from the door. "For yourself?" "Yes, madam. Name is Vincent Maddox. I work at the Prescott Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been saving up, and I figured it was time I learned something cultured." Marguerite had heard many reasons for wanting music lessons in the 3 years since she had started teaching to support herself. Parents wanted their daughters to be accomplished for marriage prospects. The occasional businessman wanted to impress associates. But a cowboy wanting to learn for himself was entirely new. "You have any musical experience, Mr. Maddox?" "No, madam, but I am a hard worker and I learn quick when I set my mind to it." She should have turned him away. Her schedule was already full with the banker's 3 daughters, the schoolteacher's son, and half a dozen other students who came and went throughout the week. But there was something in his expression, a hopefulness that reminded her of the way her late husband Thomas used to look at the world, as if good things were still possible. "The lessons are 50 cents each," she said. "Twice a week if you are serious about learning." "I can manage that, madam." "Then come in. We shall see if you have any aptitude for it." Vincent Maddox stepped into her parlor, and Marguerite immediately noticed how he had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room, surrounded by the modest furniture she had managed to keep after Thomas died, his hat still clutched in both hands. The piano dominated the small space, a beautiful upright instrument that had been her mother's, shipped around Cape Horn when her family had first come to California in the gold rush days. It was the one thing she would never part with, no matter how difficult times became. "Have you ever sung before, Mr. Maddox? In church, perhaps?" "I have been asked not to, madam." Marguerite blinked. "I beg your pardon, at the church. Reverend Patterson asked me to mouth the words instead of singing them, said I was throwing off the whole congregation." This should have been her second warning, but Marguerite found herself more intrigued than discouraged. "I see. Well, let us start with something simple. Do you know Amazing Grace?" "Yes, madam. That is, I know the words." "Good. Sing the first verse for me, please." Vincent Maddox cleared his throat, set his hat on the chair beside him, and opened his mouth. What emerged was nothing short of catastrophic. He was not merely off-key. He seemed to exist in an entirely different musical universe, where notes had no relation to one another and rhythm was a foreign concept. His voice lurched from too high to too low, never landing anywhere near the actual melody, and he dragged some words out while rushing through others with no apparent pattern. When he finished, he looked at her hopefully. How was that? Marguerite had trained herself to find something positive to say to every student, no matter how limited their talent. It took her a full 10 seconds to formulate a response. "You certainly have enthusiasm," she managed. "Thank you, madam. My pa always said enthusiasm counts for a lot." "Indeed." "Now, let us try something else. I am going to play a note on the piano and I want you to try to match it with your voice. Can you do that?" "I will certainly try, madam." Marguerite sat at the piano and played middle C, a clear, pure tone that hung in the air. "Now you." Vincent sang something that was decidedly not middle C. It was not even close. She tried again, playing the note longer. He sang again with complete confidence, producing a sound that bore no resemblance to what she had played. "Mr. Maddox," she said carefully, "can you hear the difference between what I played and what you sang?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "Should there be one? I thought I matched it." It was in that moment that Marguerite realized Vincent Maddox was not simply a poor singer. He was completely tone-deaf, unable to distinguish one pitch from another. Teaching him music would be like teaching a blind man to paint by describing colors. It was, by any reasonable measure, impossible. "Mr. Maddox, I must be honest with you. I do not believe I can help you learn to sing. You appear to have a condition where you cannot hear the differences between musical notes. It is not something that can be fixed with practice." She expected disappointment, perhaps embarrassment. What she did not expect was for his face to fall with such genuine sorrow that she felt it like a physical blow. "I see," he said quietly. "I appreciate your honesty, madam." He picked up his hat and turned toward the door. Marguerite stood there, watching this large, earnest man prepare to leave, and found herself asking a question she had not intended to ask. "Mr. Maddox, why did you want to learn music?" He stopped at the door, his back to her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "There is a girl." "Was a girl. Back in Texas before I came out here. She loved music more than anything. Used to sing all the time, beautiful as anything you ever heard. I always thought that if I could learn to sing, if I could share that with her, maybe she would have looked at me different." "What happened to her?" "She married a banker who could play the violin. I realized then that I did not have anything to offer a woman like that. Figured I would come west, make something of myself. But I guess some things are not meant to be." He started to open the door and Marguerite heard herself speak before she had consciously decided to do so. "Mr. Maddox, wait." He turned back, and she saw the hope flicker again in his green eyes. "I cannot teach you to sing," she said, "but I could teach you the piano. That is different. It does not require you to match pitch with your voice. You would only need to learn to read music and develop the finger coordination. It would be difficult, but it is possible. You would do that. Even after hearing me try to sing, I would. But you must understand, it will take time and considerable effort." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the Panamint Mountains. "Madam, I have nothing but time and effort to give. When can we start?" "Tomorrow evening. 6 o'clock. Do not be late." "No, madam." "I will be here." "Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Thank you so much." After he left, Marguerite stood in her parlor, wondering what she had just agreed to. She was a widow who needed to maintain her reputation in a small town where gossip spread faster than wildfire. Teaching piano to a handsome young cowboy could invite talk, even though she was only 28 and he could not be more than 26 or 27 himself. But there had been something in his eyes, that vulnerability mixed with hope, that had reached past all her careful defenses. For the first time in 3 years, she had acted on impulse rather than caution. She would teach him piano, collect her fees, and maintain a strictly professional relationship. That was all. It had to be all. Vincent Maddox arrived the next evening at precisely 6 o'clock, his hat on correctly this time, his hands scrubbed clean but still bearing the calluses and small scars of ranch work. He had even attempted to tame his dark hair with water, though it was already drying and curling in the evening heat. "Good evening, Mr. Maddox," Marguerite said, ushering him inside. She had spent the day teaching her regular students and had only just had time to change into a fresh dress, a simple gray cotton that was appropriate for morning but not so severe that it made her students uncomfortable. "Evening, madam. I brought the money for the first 2 weeks." He pulled coins from his pocket, carefully counted, and placed them in her palm. The money was warm from his pocket, and she found herself acutely aware of how close he was standing in her small parlor. She stepped back and gestured to the piano bench. "Please sit. We will start with the basics today. Do you know how to read any music?" "No, madam, I never had the schooling for it." "Can you read words? Books, I mean." "Yes, madam. My ma taught me before she passed. I am not fast at it, but I can manage." "Good. Reading music is similar. These are notes, and they tell you which key to press on the piano. Each key makes a different sound, and when you press them in the right order, you create a melody." She sat beside him on the piano bench, immediately realizing this was a mistake. The bench was not meant for 2 people, especially when one of them was as broad-shouldered as Vincent Maddox. Their shoulders brushed, and she caught the scent of soap and leather and something else, something clean and masculine that made her heart beat faster. She stood abruptly. "Perhaps I should demonstrate first, and then you can try." For the next hour, Marguerite guided Vincent through the absolute basics of piano playing. He had large hands which would serve him well for reaching across the keys, but his fingers were stiff from years of ranch work. He struggled to press just one key at a time, his thick fingers wanting to hit multiple notes at once, but he was patient with himself in a way that surprised her. When he made mistakes, he simply tried again, never showing frustration or anger. He listened carefully to everything she said, his brow furrowed in concentration, and he asked questions that showed he was truly trying to understand. "Why does this black key sound different from this white one?" he asked at one point, playing them in sequence. "That is the difference between a whole step and a half step," she explained. "The black keys are sharps and flats. They fill in the spaces between the regular notes. Like the spaces between fence posts," he said thoughtfully. "You need them to make the fence complete." It was such an unexpected analogy that she found herself smiling. "Yes, exactly like that." He looked up at her, and his own smile was so genuine and unguarded that she felt something shift in her chest, something she had thought died with Thomas. She turned away quickly, shuffling through her music books. "That is enough for today. Practice pressing each key individually, trying to use just one finger at a time. We will work on reading actual music next lesson." "Yes, madam. Thank you for being patient with me. I know I am not a natural at this." "You are doing fine, Mr. Maddox. Learning any new skill takes time." After he left, she sat at the piano alone and played a complicated piece by Chopin that required all her concentration. But even as her fingers flew across the keys, she found herself thinking about the way Vincent had looked at the piano, as if it were something precious and mysterious, and the way his face had lit up when he successfully played a simple scale of 5 notes. She told herself it meant nothing. He was a student. She was a teacher. That was all. The lessons continued twice a week through the rest of July and into August. Vincent proved to be a dedicated student, arriving exactly on time for every lesson and clearly practicing between sessions despite not having a piano of his own. He told her he would go to the church sometimes when it was empty and practice on the piano there. and Reverend Patterson had been kind enough to allow it as long as he did not sing. "The Reverend seems to have strong feelings about your singing," Marguerite observed one evening as they worked on a simple folk melody. Vincent laughed, and it was a rich, warm sound that filled her small parlor. "He told me once that the good Lord gave everyone gifts, and mine was clearly not music. But he said the Lord also appreciates persistence, so he would support my learning the piano even if he had to bar me from the choir forever." "That seems harsh." "No, madam. He was being honest, and I appreciate that. I know I cannot sing, but this I might be able to learn." He was improving, slowly but steadily. His fingers were becoming more nimble, and he was starting to read simple musical notation. He still could not hear if he was playing the right notes or not, but he learned to trust the written music and his finger positions on the keys. More than his progress, Marguerite found herself drawn to his company. He had a way of looking at the world that was both practical and oddly poetic. He told her stories about the ranch, about the cattle drives and the vast open spaces of the California wilderness, and she found herself sharing things she had not spoken about in years. "My husband died in the mine," she told him one evening after a lesson had run long. "There was a collapse. They told me he died instantly, that he did not suffer. I have never been certain if that was true or if they said it to comfort me." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "My pa died when I was 16. Rattlesnake bite, far from any doctor. He took 3 days to pass, and they were hard days. I know which one I would prefer if I had to choose. I am sorry. That must have been terrible to witness." It was. But he used those 3 days to tell me things, important things about being a man and living a good life. I have carried those words with me ever since. Maybe if he had gone instant, I would not have had that. She had not thought of it that way before. Perhaps there is mercy in both then. Perhaps, madam. It was after that conversation that she noticed her feelings for Vincent Maddox had shifted into dangerous territory. She found herself thinking about him between lessons, wondering what he was doing at the ranch, if he was safe during the dangerous work with cattle and horses. She took extra care with her appearance on lesson days, telling herself it was simple professional pride, but she knew better. August gave way to September, and the brutal heat began to ease slightly. Vincent had been taking lessons for 2 months, and he could now play several simple songs competently. He still could not sing, and he still could not hear if he hit a wrong note, but his ability to read music and his dedication to practice had carried him further than Marguerite would have thought possible. It was during a lesson in mid-September that everything changed. They were working on a piece that required him to use both hands independently, playing different rhythms simultaneously. It was challenging even for naturally musical students, and Vincent was struggling with it. His frustration was finally starting to show, something she had rarely seen from him. "I do not understand how anyone does this," he said, pulling his hands back from the keys. "How do you make each hand think differently? It takes practice. Here, let me show you again." She sat beside him on the bench, as she had started doing regularly despite her earlier reservations. She played through the section slowly, showing him how the left hand maintained a steady rhythm while the right hand danced above it. "See, the left hand is like the heartbeat. It stays constant while the right hand tells the story. Can you show me slower, on my hands?" It was an innocent request from a student who learned well through physical demonstration. Marguerite had done it with other students, guiding their fingers to the correct positions. But when she reached for Vincent's hands, when her smaller fingers touched his calloused, sun-browned skin, she felt an electric current run through her entire body. He felt it too. She knew because he went completely still, his breath catching audibly. She should have pulled away. Instead, She found herself guiding his left hand through the simple, repetitive pattern, then placing his right hand on the higher keys. His hands were warm under hers, strong and capable, and she was suddenly intensely aware of every point where their bodies were touching on the small bench. "Marguerite," he said softly, and it was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up at him, and he was so close she could see the small scar on his chin, the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the way his pupils had dilated as he looked at her. "This is not proper," she whispered, but she did not move away. "No, madam, it is not," he agreed, and he did not move away either. They sat there, frozen in that moment of possibility, the piano keys silent under their joined hands. Marguerite's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. 3 years of careful propriety, of maintaining appropriate distance from every man in Panamint, of being the respectable widow who taught music lessons, all of it was balanced on the edge of a knife. "I should go," Vincent said, but his hands turned under hers, his fingers interlacing with her own. "Yes, you should." Neither of them moved. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Vincent leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and questioning, nothing like the passionate kisses she had shared with Thomas in the privacy of their marriage. This was a kiss that asked permission, that promised care and patience, that offered something fragile and precious. Marguerite kissed him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she stood abruptly from the piano bench and crossed to the window, pressing her hands against the cool glass. "This cannot happen," she said. "I am your teacher. You are my student. The town would destroy my reputation if anyone knew. I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "I am sorry, Marguerite. I should not have done that. I kissed you back," she said quietly. "The fault is equally mine. I will leave. I will not come back for lessons if it makes this easier for you. No." She turned to face him, and she could feel tears burning in her eyes. "I do not want you to leave." "Then, what do we do?" It was a fair question, and she had no good answer. She was a 28-year-old widow trying to survive in a small mining town where reputation was everything. He was a cowboy with no family and limited prospects, working for wages at someone else's ranch. Even if they courted properly, there would be talk. She was supposed to be in mourning, even after 3 years. Women in her position were expected to either remain devoted to their late husband's memory or remarry for practical purposes, preferably to an established man of means. But when she looked at Vincent Maddox, standing in her parlor with his hat in his hands and hope and fear warring in his eyes, she did not care about any of that. "We should court," she said. "Properly. You could call on me on Sundays after church. We could take walks where people can see us. Do things respectably. I would like that very much. But the lessons should stop. We cannot continue them while we are courting. It would not be appropriate." She could see the disappointment in his face. "I understand. I do not want to do anything that would hurt your standing in this town. Give me a week to arrange things. I will tell people that I am reducing my teaching schedule. Then you can begin calling on me." "Yes, madam, Marguerite. I will wait." After he left, Marguerite sat at her piano and tried to play, but her hands were shaking too badly. She had not felt this way since she was a girl, since before Thomas, when the world still seemed full of infinite possibilities. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She was alive in a way she had not been for 3 long years. The next Sunday, after church services, Vincent Maddox approached Marguerite in full view of half the town and asked if he might call on her that afternoon. She said yes, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach, and she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching them, dozens of minds already forming opinions and judgments. Let them look, she thought. Let them talk. I am entitled to a life beyond grief." Vincent arrived at her house at 2 o'clock, dressed in his best clothes, which were still clearly the clothes of a working cowboy but clean and carefully maintained. He brought wildflowers he had picked from the hills beyond the ranch, a riot of late summer colors that made her smile. "They are beautiful," she said, accepting them. "Come in while I put them in water." They walked through Panamint together that afternoon, maintaining a respectable distance but talking freely. Vincent told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his mother to fever when he was 12 and his father to the rattlesnake 4 years later. He told her about coming west because there was nothing left for him in Texas but memories and a piece of land too small to support cattle. "I have been working at the Prescott Ranch for 2 years now," he said as they walked past the general store. "Mr. Prescott is a fair man, pays on time, does not work his men to death, but it is his ranch, his land, his cattle. I am just hired help. You want your own ranch someday?" "I do. I have been saving every penny I can spare. Figure in another 5 years, maybe 10, I could afford a small place. Nothing fancy but enough to run a modest herd. That is a good dream." "What about you, Marguerite? What are your dreams?" It was a question no one had asked her in years. People assumed they knew what widows dreamed about, either remarriage or continued devotion to the dead. They did not imagine widows might have dreams of their own. "I want to keep teaching," she said slowly, working through thoughts she had never fully articulated before. "I want to fill this town with music. Maybe someday open a proper music school, not just lessons in my parlor. I want to matter for something I create, not just as someone's wife or widow." Vincent looked at her with such understanding and admiration that she felt her breath catch. "That is a fine dream. You are an excellent teacher, even to students as hopeless as me." "You were not hopeless. You were determined. That made all the difference." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, nodding to neighbors who watched with varying degrees of approval and curiosity. Marguerite saw Mrs. Henderson from the general store whisper something to her daughter, and old Mr. Patterson, the Reverend's father, tipped his hat to them with a knowing smile. "They are all watching us," Vincent observed quietly. "I know. Does it bother you?" "No, madam. I am proud to be seen with you. I just do not want to make trouble for you." "I am making my own choices, Vincent. If there is trouble, it is mine to handle." Over the next several weeks, Vincent called on Marguerite every Sunday and one evening during the week. They took walks, sat on her porch talking until the stars came out, and gradually shared more of their lives with each other. She learned that he had a scar on his left shoulder from being gored by a longhorn, that he could not swim despite growing up near water, that he was terrified of enclosed spaces after getting trapped in a barn during a storm as a child. He learned that she had wanted to be a concert pianist before she married, that she still sometimes played music she had performed at her conservatory in Boston, that she missed the ocean even though she had not seen it in 8 years, that she felt guilty for being happy again because it seemed like a betrayal of Thomas's memory. "Grief and love are not the same thing," Vincent told her one evening as they sat on her porch swing. "You can love what you had with your husband and still love something new. One does not erase the other." "How did you get so wise?" "I am not wise. I just know that my pa would not want me to stop living because he died. He would want me to have a full life, to find happiness where I could. I imagine your husband would want the same for you." Marguerite thought about Thomas, about the life they had briefly shared. He had been a good man, hardworking and kind, but their marriage had been one of practicality more than passion. She had needed stability after her parents died, and he had wanted a wife to make a home. They had cared for each other, and she had mourned him sincerely, but what she felt for Vincent was different. This was the kind of love she had read about in novels, the kind that made her heart race and her hands tremble, the kind that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I think he would," she said softly. "Thomas wanted me to be happy. He told me that near the end. He was starting to cough more, having trouble with his lungs from the mine dust. He said if anything happened to him, I should sell the claim and live my own life. 2 months later, he was gone." Vincent took her hand, and they sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of Panamint settling in for the night. Dogs barking in the distance, someone playing a harmonica poorly, the creak of wagon wheels on the dusty street. "Marguerite, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her turn to look at him. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you. I might already be in love with you. I have been since that first day when you agreed to teach me even after hearing me try to sing. You could have turned me away, but you gave me a chance. You have been giving me chances ever since." Her heart was hammering in her chest. "Vincent, I have to be careful. My reputation, my livelihood, everything depends on me being respectable. I cannot afford to be reckless. I know. That is why I want to do this properly." He stood and turned to face her, and in the lamplight spilling from her window, she could see how nervous he was. "I do not have much to offer you right now. I am a cowboy with a small savings account and a dream of owning land someday. But I am a hard worker and I am honest, and I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Marguerite Miller, would you consider marrying me?" She should have said no. She should have told him it was too soon, that they had only been courting for a few weeks, that she needed more time. But looking at this man who had come to her wanting to learn music because he had loved a girl who valued it, who had persisted despite having no natural talent, who had been unfailingly patient and kind and genuine with her, she knew her answer. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss they shared on her porch that night was nothing like the first gentle, questioning kiss at the piano. This was a kiss of commitment and promise, of passion barely restrained by propriety. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear I will. You already do." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Panamint, with Reverend Patterson officiating and most of the town in attendance. Marguerite wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had made herself, simple but elegant, and Vincent wore a new suit that she suspected had cost him a significant portion of his savings. There was some talk, of course. Some people thought it was too soon after Thomas's death, even though 3 years was a respectable mourning period. Others thought it was unseemly for a refined music teacher to marry a common cowboy. But there were also many who attended the wedding with genuine happiness, who had watched them courting and seen how well suited they were. Mrs. Henderson from the general store gave them a set of fine dishes. The Prescotts, Vincent's employers, gave them a generous cash gift and a promise that Vincent could continue working at the ranch for as long as he wanted. Even Reverend Patterson, who had once banned Vincent from singing in church, gave them a beautiful Bible with their names inscribed in gold on the cover. The wedding itself was simple but meaningful. When Vincent spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when Marguerite spoke hers, she meant every word. This was not a marriage of convenience or necessity. This was a marriage of choice and love. They had a modest reception at Marguerite's house, which would now be their house together. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing in the street as the sun set over the Panamint Mountains. Vincent did not dance, claiming his coordination was limited to staying on a horse and playing piano, but he stood with his arm around Marguerite's waist and watched their neighbors celebrate with them. "Happy?" he asked her as the stars began to appear. "Wonderfully so," she replied, and it was the truth. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous despite being adults who had been married before. But they were patient with each other, and the love between them made everything feel natural and right. Afterward, they lay in bed together, Marguerite's head on Vincent's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I never thought I would have this again," she admitted quietly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would be the music teacher forever, alone but respected." "Are you sorry you are not alone anymore?" "Not for a single second." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Vincent continued working at the Prescott Ranch, leaving before dawn and returning as the sun was setting. Marguerite continued teaching music lessons, though she reduced her schedule slightly to have more time for managing their household. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Vincent surprised her by continuing to practice piano, even though she was no longer his teacher. He would sit at the instrument after dinner, working through the simple pieces she had taught him. And though he still could not hear if he hit wrong notes, he had memorized the finger positions so well that he played them mostly correctly. "You do not have to keep practicing," she told him one evening, watching him work through a folk song. "You do not have anything to prove." "I like it," he said simply. "It makes me feel close to you even when I am not actually with you. When I am out on the range and missing you, I think about these songs, about where my fingers should go on the keys, and it is like carrying a piece of you with me." How could she not love this man? The first real challenge to their happiness came in December, when the Prescott Ranch had a particularly difficult week. 3 horses broke through a fence and got loose in the hills, and Vincent spent 2 days tracking them down in freezing rain. He came home the second night soaked through, shivering, and by morning he was burning with fever. Marguerite canceled all her lessons and spent 3 days nursing him through pneumonia, terrified she would lose him the way she had lost Thomas. She made broths he could barely swallow, changed his sweat-soaked sheets, and sat beside the bed at night listening to his labored breathing, praying to a God she sometimes doubted that he would not take this man from her. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Vincent opened his eyes, clear and lucid for the first time in days, and found her sitting beside the bed with her head pillowed on her arms, asleep from exhaustion. "Marguerite," he whispered, his voice rough and unused. She jerked awake, immediately reaching to feel his forehead. It was cool, damp with clean sweat instead of fever heat. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Thank God. How long was I out? 3 days. You scared me half to death, Vincent Maddox. I am sorry." He tried to sit up and immediately fell back against the pillows, weak as a kitten. "I suppose I should not try to wrangle horses in the rain." "No, you should not." She brought him water, helping him drink. "You are staying in this bed until you are fully recovered. I do not care if it takes a week." It took 10 days before he was strong enough to return to work, and even then Marguerite made him promise to take things easy. The near loss had shaken her badly, reminding her of how fragile happiness could be, how quickly it could be taken away. But it had also shown her something else. It had shown her that Vincent was not Thomas. He was stronger, younger, more careful about his own safety because he had someone to come home to now. And it had shown her that she was stronger than she had believed. She had nursed him through pneumonia without falling apart, had managed their household and her teaching schedule without help, had been the kind of wife who could handle a crisis. Christmas came, and they celebrated modestly but joyfully. Marguerite gave Vincent a new pair of leather gloves she had saved for. Vincent gave her a delicate silver necklace he must have spent weeks' worth of wages on, and when he fastened it around her neck, his hands were shaking. "You should not have spent so much," she protested, even as she touched the necklace with wonder. "You are worth more than silver," he said. "You are worth gold and diamonds and everything precious, but this is what I could afford, and I wanted you to have something beautiful." She kissed him then, deep and long, and they spent Christmas afternoon in bed together, celebrating their love in the most fundamental way. The new year of 1883 brought changes to Panamint. The silver mines that had sustained the town were starting to play out, and people were beginning to talk about moving on to new strikes, new opportunities. It made Marguerite nervous. Her students' families might leave, taking her income with them. The whole town could empty out the way so many boomtowns did, leaving nothing but ghost buildings and memories. Vincent noticed her worry and pulled her close one evening. "If the town dies, we will go somewhere else. I can find work anywhere there is cattle. You can teach music anywhere there is people. We will be fine, Marguerite. I do not want to leave our home. Then we will stay as long as we can. But home is not a building. Home is wherever we are together." His simple faith in their future gave her strength. She focused on her teaching, on making each lesson count, on giving her students skills they would carry with them wherever they went. She started offering evening classes for adults who wanted to learn music, charging less than her regular rate because she knew many of them could not afford more. To her surprise, several cowboys from various ranches in the area signed up for the adult classes. Apparently, Vincent had been talking about his lessons and they were curious. None of them were tone-deaf like Vincent, but most of them were starting from absolute ignorance, and she found teaching them deeply satisfying. One of the cowboys, a young man named Jake who worked with Vincent at the Prescott Ranch, proved to have a natural ear for music. He learned quickly, and within a few months, he could play several songs competently. Watching him progress made Marguerite think about starting a small orchestra, something the town could be proud of. She mentioned the idea to Vincent one evening. "Do you think people would be interested? We could perform at church services, maybe at town gatherings." "I think it is a wonderful idea. You should talk to Reverend Patterson about it." She did, and to her delight, the Reverend was enthusiastic. He helped her recruit musicians from the congregation, people who had played instruments back east or had learned as children and let their skills lapse. By March, Marguerite had assembled a small but dedicated group: 2 violins, a cello, a flute, and herself on piano. They practiced twice a week in the church, and their first performance on Easter Sunday was a modest triumph. The music was simple, mostly hymns and folk songs, but it was performed with genuine feeling and the congregation appreciated it. Marguerite stood to acknowledge the applause afterward and felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. Vincent was in the front pew, beaming at her with such obvious love and pride that she felt her eyes sting with happy tears. This was what she had dreamed of, creating music in her community, being valued for her skills and her contributions, and she had a partner who supported those dreams unconditionally. In May, Marguerite realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had been afraid to hope, afraid to believe it was possible. She was 29 years old, and she and Thomas had never conceived during their marriage, though they had certainly tried. She had assumed she was barren, that children would not be part of her life. But her monthly courses had not come in 2 months, and she was feeling queasy in the mornings, and when she finally worked up the courage to see the doctor in the next town over, he confirmed what she had hardly dared to hope. She was going to have a baby. Telling Vincent was one of the greatest joys of her life. She waited until evening, until he had returned from the ranch and washed up for dinner. She had made his favorite meal, beef stew with fresh bread, and she could barely sit still as they ate. "You are nervous about something," he observed, setting down his spoon. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderfully, perfectly right." She took a deep breath. "Vincent, I am carrying your child." The look on his face went from confusion to comprehension to absolute wonder in the space of a heartbeat. "You are certain?" The doctor confirmed it this morning. "I am about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in December." He stood so abruptly his chair fell over, but he did not notice. He crossed to her side of the table and pulled her to her feet, holding her as if she were made of glass. "A baby, we are having a baby." "Yes, are you happy?" "Happy, Marguerite, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "Are you well? Is everything all right? Should you be teaching still? Should you be cooking?" She laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I am pregnant, not ill. I can continue everything normally for months yet, though I may need to reduce my teaching schedule eventually. Whatever you need. Anything you need. I will take extra work, save more money. We will need things for the baby, clothes and a cradle," and she kissed him to stop the flood of words. "We have time. Months and months of time. For now, let us just be happy about it." They were happy, deliriously so. Vincent became even more protective than usual, worrying if she lifted anything heavy or stayed on her feet too long. Marguerite found it endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from love. The pregnancy progressed normally through the summer. Marguerite continued teaching, though she did reduce her schedule as her energy waned. The small orchestra continued to practice and perform, bringing music to Panamint even as the town slowly shrank around them. More families left each month, heading to new mining strikes or back east, but enough remained to keep the town alive. In August, Vincent came home with unexpected news. "Mr. Prescott called me into his office today. He is getting too old to manage the ranch himself, and his children have no interest in it. He wants to sell." Marguerite looked up from the baby blanket she was knitting. "That is unfortunate. Will you be able to find work at another ranch?" "He wants to sell it to me." She nearly dropped her knitting. "What? He knows I have been saving to buy land. He said he would rather sell to someone who loves the ranch, who understands the work. He is offering me terms, Marguerite. I would not have to pay all at once. I could make payments over 10 years. Can we afford it?" Vincent sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Barely. It would be tight for years. We would have to be careful with every penny, but it would be ours. Our land, our cattle, our future. A legacy to leave our children. Children, plural." The thought made her smile. "What do you want to do?" "I want to build something. I want our baby to grow up on land that belongs to us, not working for someone else's dreams. But I will not do it if you think it is too risky. You and the baby, you are what matters most. I will not put you in danger for my pride." Marguerite thought about it carefully. It would be a risk, certainly. They would be taking on debt and responsibility at a time when the town around them was dying. But Vincent was right. This was an opportunity to build something lasting, something that would outlive them both. "I think we should do it," she said. "I think we should buy the ranch. Are you certain?" "I am certain that I trust you. I am certain that you will work harder than anyone to make it succeed. And I am certain that our children deserve a father who reaches for his dreams." Vincent pulled her close as he could with her swelling belly between them, and she felt his tears wet against her hair. "I will make this work. I promise you, Marguerite. I will make you proud." "You already do, every single day." They finalized the purchase in September. The ranch was modest by California standards, about 800 acres of grazing land in the hills north of Panamint, with a small ranch house, a barn, and 100 head of cattle. It was not much, but it was theirs. Moving to the ranch meant leaving Marguerite's house in town, the house where she had built her life after Thomas died, where she had taught her students, where she and Vincent had fallen in love. It was bittersweet, but she knew it was the right choice. She arranged to continue teaching her remaining students by having them come to the ranch twice a week. It meant they had to travel further, but most of the families were willing to make the trip. The piano made the journey carefully in a borrowed wagon, and Vincent spent a whole day setting it up in the ranch house parlor, making sure it was perfectly positioned and level. "Your piano is the heart of any house we live in," he told her as he adjusted it for the third time. "It needs to be just right." The ranch house was smaller than her house in town had been, but it was solidly built and had a beautiful view of the valley below. Marguerite could stand on the porch and see for miles, could watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh chapter in a story that kept getting better. December arrived with cold winds and the promise of rain. Marguerite was huge now, moving slowly and carefully, tired all the time but happy. Vincent hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle, so he could be close to the house as her time approached. He was terrified something would go wrong, that he would lose her or the baby or both, and no amount of reassurance could fully ease his fears. "Women have babies every day," she told him gently when she woke one night to find him watching her sleep. "I am healthy and strong. Everything will be fine." "I cannot lose you," he said quietly. "You are everything to me, Marguerite. You and this baby are my whole world. Then have faith. Faith in me, faith in our baby, faith in God if you can manage it. We are going to be fine." The baby came on a cold December night, arriving in a rush after hours of labor that left Marguerite exhausted but triumphant. The doctor from the neighboring town had stayed at the ranch for the last week, waiting for the birth, and his calm competence helped Vincent stay relatively composed even as Marguerite worked through the pain. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, the doctor wrapped the infant and placed the bundle in Marguerite's arms. "You have a son, Mrs. Maddox. A healthy baby boy. A son." Marguerite looked down at the tiny face, at the eyes that were trying to focus, at the small fists waving in the air, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her child, hers and Vincent's, a life they had created together out of love. "Can I?" Vincent asked hesitantly from beside the bed, and she realized he was crying. "Of course. Come meet your son." Vincent took the baby with such care, such wonder, that Marguerite felt her own tears spill over. He stood there, this strong man who worked cattle and built fences and tamed horses, holding their infant son as if he were made of spun glass, and she knew she had never loved him more than in that moment. "Hello, little one," Vincent whispered. "I am your father. I am going to do my very best by you, I promise." They named him Thomas Vincent Maddox, honoring both the past and the future. Young Thomas was a good baby, relatively quiet and content, and he brought a joy to the ranch house that seemed to permeate everything. Even the hardest days felt lighter with his presence. Marguerite reduced her teaching to just a few students, focusing her energy on caring for Thomas and managing the household while Vincent worked the ranch. It was harder than she had expected, this life on a ranch with an infant, but it was also deeply satisfying. She was building a family, a real family, and every sacrifice felt worthwhile. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch slowly became more prosperous, as Vincent proved to be as good at managing the business as he was at the physical work. He hired more hands, expanded the herd, and started breeding horses as well as cattle. The debt to Mr. Prescott was being paid down steadily, and they were even starting to save a bit beyond that. Panamint continued to shrink, but it did not die entirely. Enough people remained to sustain a small community, and Marguerite's music students and orchestra kept the cultural life of the town alive. She had become something of a pillar of the community, respected not just as the rancher's wife, but as a teacher and musician in her own right. In 1885, Marguerite became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was harder than the first, she weathered it with more confidence. Their daughter, Marie Victoria Maddox, was born in September, a beautiful baby with Vincent's green eyes and Marguerite's dark hair. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, watching her sleep, and when she was awake, he would try to show her his toys and tell her stories in his toddling vocabulary. It was achingly sweet to watch. Vincent was equally smitten with their daughter. "I have everything I ever dreamed of," he told Marguerite one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset while their children slept inside. "A family, land of my own, a wife I love more than life itself. I am the luckiest man in California." "Even though you still cannot sing," she teased gently. He laughed. Although I have been practicing a lullaby on the piano for Marie, I cannot sing it, but I can play it for her." "I know. I heard you the other night. It was beautiful, Vincent. I had a good teacher." "You had determination. That mattered more than any teacher could." The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. He followed Vincent around whenever he could, learning about cattle and horses, already showing signs of being a natural rancher. Marie was quieter, more introspective, and she showed an early interest in music that delighted Marguerite. In 1887, when Thomas was 4 and Marie was 2, Marguerite became pregnant again. This pregnancy was the hardest yet, leaving her exhausted and sometimes bedridden. Vincent hired a woman from town to help with the children and the house, refusing to let Marguerite push herself too hard. Their second son, James William Maddox, was born in April of 1888, a tiny but healthy baby who had a surprisingly loud cry. The birth was difficult, and the doctor warned Marguerite that she should not have any more children, that another pregnancy could be dangerous for her. It was sobering news, but they had 3 healthy children and more blessings than they had ever expected. They would be grateful for what they had. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Vincent's hard work and careful management paid off, and by 1890 they had paid off the debt to Mr. Prescott entirely. The ranch was truly theirs, free and clear, a legacy for their children. Marguerite continued teaching, though only a few select students now, focusing more on her children's education. Thomas, at 7, was learning to read and write, and he showed an aptitude for numbers that would serve him well in managing the ranch someday. Marie, at 5, was already learning basic piano, her small fingers navigating the keys with a natural grace that reminded Marguerite of herself at that age. James, at 2, was too young for formal lessons, but loved to bang on the piano keys and sing nonsense songs at the top of his lungs. The town of Panamint, while much smaller than it had been in its heyday, had stabilized. The people who remained were those who had put down real roots, who saw California as home rather than just a place to extract wealth. Marguerite's orchestra still performed at church and community gatherings, and she had trained several younger musicians who would carry on after her. One evening in the fall of 1890, Vincent and Marguerite sat on their porch after the children had gone to bed, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They did this often, these quiet moments together, a habit from their courting days that they had never abandoned. "Do you remember the day you came to my door asking for music lessons?" Marguerite asked, lacing her fingers through his. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen and being terrified you would turn me away." I almost did. After I heard you try to sing, I almost told you it was hopeless. I am glad you did not. Me too. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I have been thinking about that girl you mentioned, the one in Texas who married the banker. Do you ever wonder what happened to her? Vincent was quiet for a moment. I have not thought about her in years, to be honest. She was a dream, Marguerite, a fantasy of what I thought I wanted. You are real. This life, our children, the ranch, all of it is real and better than any dream I could have imagined. Even though I made you learn piano when you are completely tone deaf, especially because of that. You saw something in me worth teaching, worth investing in. You gave me more than music lessons. You gave me a chance at a life I never thought I could have. Marguerite thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first awkward lesson, through the growing attraction they had both tried to deny, through courtship and marriage and the building of a life together. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean years, moments of doubt and fear, but there had been so much more joy than sorrow, so much more love than loss. I am grateful for you every day, she said softly. For your kindness, your dedication, your love. You make me better than I could be alone. That works both ways. He kissed the top of her head. We make each other better. The next decade brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch continued to grow, and Vincent became known throughout the region as a fair employer and skilled rancher. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, already talking about expansion and improvements. Marie continued with her music, showing such talent that Marguerite sometimes wondered if she should have more formal training, perhaps in San Francisco or even back east. James was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and adventures, but with a good heart underneath the mischief. Marguerite's reputation as a music teacher spread beyond Panamint. Families from neighboring towns would send their children to her for lessons, and she even took on a few promising students as live-in apprentices, training them not just to play but to teach others. Her dream of starting a music school had evolved into something more organic but equally valuable, a network of musicians and teachers spreading culture throughout the region. The love between Marguerite and Vincent only deepened with time. They had the kind of partnership that made others envious, built on mutual respect and unwavering support. They still made time for each other despite the demands of the ranch and the children, still took walks together, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Vincent never did learn to sing. His tone deafness remained absolute, and Reverend Patterson's ban from the church choir remained firmly in place. But he continued to play piano, working through increasingly complex pieces by sheer memorization and determination. Sometimes Marguerite would hear him practicing late at night, the same measures over and over until he got them right, and she would smile at his persistence. In 1900, as the new century dawned, the Maddox family gathered for a photograph. Thomas, now 17 and nearly as tall as his father, stood proud and serious. Marie, 15 and beautiful, stood with perfect posture learned from years of piano lessons. James, 12 and still growing into his features, grinned mischievously at the camera. Marguerite, now 45 but still lovely, sat with her hand in Vincent's. And Vincent, 44 and silver starting to thread through his dark hair, looked at the camera with the same steady, genuine expression he had worn since the day he first knocked on Marguerite's door 18 years earlier. The photograph captured a moment, but it represented so much more. It represented a life built on an improbable foundation, on a tone-deaf cowboy's desire to learn music and a widow's willingness to teach him. It represented love that grew from respect and shared dreams, that weathered challenges and celebrated triumphs, that created a legacy of family and music and hard work. As they posed for the photograph, Marguerite thought about that first lesson, about Vincent's catastrophic attempt to sing Amazing Grace, about the moment she realized he could never hear pitch but decided to teach him piano anyway. Every choice they had made since then had led to this moment, to this family, to this life. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked quietly as the photographer adjusted his equipment. "About how lucky I am," she replied. "About how a simple music lesson changed everything." "Not so simple," he said with a smile. "I was terrible. You were determined. There is a difference." The photographer called for their attention and they all went still, frozen in time by the camera's click. But the moment passed, and life continued as it always did. Thomas took over more responsibility at the ranch, learning the business from Vincent with the same dedication Vincent had once brought to piano lessons. He had dreams of expanding, of buying adjacent land, of building the Maddox ranch into something that would last for generations. Marie's musical talent continued to flourish. At 17, she was teaching younger students herself, working alongside her mother, and there was talk of her attending a conservatory in San Francisco. Marguerite encouraged it, even though it would mean being apart from her daughter, because she understood the importance of pursuing one's gifts. James found his passion in horses. He had a natural way with them, a patience and understanding that made him invaluable on the ranch. He started a breeding program for working horses, animals with the strength and intelligence needed for ranch work, and it became increasingly profitable. As Marguerite and Vincent entered their 50s, they began to slow down slightly, letting their children take on more responsibility. But they were far from retirement. Vincent still worked the ranch every day, and Marguerite still taught her most dedicated students. They had simply learned to balance work with rest, to appreciate the quiet moments as much as the busy ones. In 1905, Thomas married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was a grand affair by Panamint standards, with music provided by Marguerite's students and attended by people from throughout the region. Watching her son marry, seeing the love in his eyes for his bride, Marguerite was reminded of her own wedding to Vincent all those years ago. "We did well with him," Vincent whispered to her during the ceremony. "We did well with all of them," she replied. The following year, Thomas and Sarah had their first child, a daughter they named Marguerite in honor of her grandmother. Holding her namesake, Marguerite felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. She was a grandmother now, a role she embraced with joy. Marie did eventually go to San Francisco to study music, leaving in the fall of 1906. It was hard to let her go, but Marguerite knew it was necessary. Her daughter had gifts that needed proper training, and she would not hold her back. Marie wrote home regularly, describing her studies and the vibrant cultural life of the city, and every letter filled Marguerite with pride. James, at 18, showed no interest in leaving the ranch. His horse breeding program was becoming well known, and he had steady clients from across California. He was courting a local girl, the daughter of the general store owner in Panamint, and Marguerite suspected another wedding would not be far off. As Marguerite and Vincent approached their 60th birthdays, they found themselves with time to reflect on the life they had built together. The ranch was prosperous and would provide for their children and grandchildren. Marguerite's students had spread across the region, teaching music to a new generation. They had created something lasting, something meaningful. One evening, Vincent surprised Marguerite by asking her to come to the parlor. When she arrived, she found him sitting at the piano, his weathered hands resting on the keys. "I have been practicing something," he said. "I wanted to get it right before I showed you." Vincent, you do not have to prove anything to me. You know that. This is not about proving. This is about expressing. He began to play, and Marguerite recognized the piece immediately. It was the first song she had ever taught him, a simple folk melody they had worked on during those early lessons when they were falling in love, but neither would admit it. He played it perfectly, or as perfectly as someone who could not hear the notes could play. There were a few small errors, places where his finger hit slightly wrong, but the overall effect was beautiful because it was filled with so much emotion. When he finished, he turned to look at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I have been playing this piano for 23 years, he said. "I have never heard a single note the way you hear them. But every time I sit here, every time I put my fingers on these keys, I feel close to you. I feel the love we built together. Music was the beginning of us, Marguerite, and I wanted you to know that it still matters to me." She crossed to the piano and sat beside him on the bench, just as she had all those years ago when she was his teacher, and he was her student, and neither of them knew where their story would lead. "You gave me more than I ever gave you," she said softly. "You gave me a reason to hope again, a reason to love, a reason to build a future. The music was just the excuse that brought us together. It was a good excuse." They sat together at the piano, their hands intertwined, and Marguerite played the same folk melody Vincent had just played. But this time they played it together, 4 hands on the keys, creating something that was more than either of them could create alone. That moment, sitting at the piano with the man she loved, playing music in the house they had built on the land they had worked, with their children and grandchildren as the fruit of their love, Marguerite felt complete. The journey from that first impossible music lesson to this moment of perfect harmony had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. The years continued, as years do, bringing more grandchildren and the challenges of aging. Vincent's hair went completely silver, and he moved a bit slower, but he still worked the ranch every day he was able. Marguerite's fingers became less nimble, arthritis making it harder to play the complex pieces she had once performed with ease, but she continued teaching, passing on her knowledge and her love of music. Marie returned from San Francisco in 1912, now an accomplished concert pianist who had performed throughout California. She had married a violinist, and together they wanted to establish a music conservatory in Sacramento. Marguerite gave them her blessing and her piano, the beautiful instrument that had been her mother's and then hers, so that it could continue making music for generations to come. Thomas and Sarah had 4 children by then, and the ranch house was often filled with the sound of grandchildren playing and laughing. The Maddox Ranch had expanded significantly, fulfilling Thomas's dreams, and was now one of the most successful in the region. James married his general store sweetheart in 1913, and they settled on a portion of the ranch land, building their own house and focusing on the horse breeding business, which had become surprisingly lucrative. In 1915, Marguerite and Vincent celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary quietly, sitting on the porch of the ranch house as they had done countless times before. They were in their 60s now, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but their love had only grown stronger with time. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked, a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Regret what? Marrying me?" Taking a chance on a tone-deaf cowboy with big dreams and little money. Marguerite took his weathered hand in hers, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his life. "I have never regretted a single moment, Vincent Maddox. Not one. You gave me a life I never imagined possible, a love I thought I would never find. How could I regret that? I just want to make sure you have been happy." "I have been more than happy. I have been blessed beyond measure." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same view they had watched for more than 3 decades. The ranch spread out below them, evidence of their hard work and dedication. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. This was what they had built together. Not just a ranch or a family or a legacy of music, but a life filled with purpose and love and meaning. It had started with an impossible request, a tone-deaf cowboy asking for singing lessons, and it had become a love story that would echo through generations. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, Vincent turned to Marguerite with the same expression of wonder and love he had worn since the day he first saw her. "I love you, Marguerite Maddox. I have loved you since the moment you agreed to teach me despite knowing it was hopeless. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Vincent. You walked into my life when I thought my story was over, and you gave me a whole new beginning. You are the best choice I ever made." They sat together under the stars, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting from the most improbable beginning. The tone-deaf cowboy and the widow who taught music lessons had become partners, lovers, parents, grandparents, and the foundation of a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations. As they finally rose to go inside, Vincent's hand steady on Marguerite's arm, they paused at the door and looked back at the ranch one more time. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had created note by note, day by day, choice by choice, and it was perfect. The final years of their lives were spent surrounded by the love they had cultivated. Marguerite continued to teach until her arthritis made it impossible, and even then she would sit with students and guide them verbally, her ear still perfect even when her hands could no longer demonstrate. Vincent worked the ranch until he was 70, finally turning over complete control to Thomas only when his body simply could not keep up with the demands anymore. They grew old together, as they had always planned, supporting each other through the aches and pains of aging, celebrating every new grandchild and great-grandchild, watching their legacy spread across California as their children and students carried forward everything they had taught. On a spring morning in 1925, Vincent Maddox passed away peacefully in his sleep, Marguerite's hand in his, just as it had been for 43 years of marriage. He was 70 years old and had lived a life of purpose, hard work, and deep love. Marguerite grieved for him with the same intensity she had loved him, but she did not fall apart. She had their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around her. She had the ranch they had built together. She had the music students whose lives they had touched. She had the memories of 4 decades of partnership and love. She lived for 3 more years, teaching when she could, playing the new piano her children had bought her when her mother's piano went to Marie's conservatory. She told stories about Vincent to her grandchildren, about how he had been completely tone-deaf but learned piano anyway, about how he had courted her properly and married her despite the town's gossip, about how he had built the ranch from nothing into something that would last for generations. On a December evening in 1928, Marguerite Miller Maddox passed away peacefully, surrounded by her family. Her last words were about Vincent, about how she could not wait to see him again, about how their love had been the great adventure of her life. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, dates, and a single phrase that captured the essence of their relationship. Together in love, forever in music. The Maddox Ranch continued to thrive for generations, and the music school Marie established in Sacramento became one of the most respected in California. Thomas's descendants still worked the land, and James's horse breeding program became legendary throughout the West. Every generation knew the story of how their family began, of the tone-deaf cowboy who asked for music lessons and the widow who taught him anyway, of the improbable love that grew from that simple beginning. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people said you could hear piano music drifting across the ranch, a simple folk melody played with more heart than technical perfection, the sound of a love that transcended death itself. The story of Marguerite and Vincent became part of Panamin's history, told and retold, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that determination and genuine feeling mattered more than natural talent, that the best stories often began with someone taking a chance on the impossible. Their legacy was not just the ranch or the music students or the family they created. Their legacy was the proof that two people, united by love and commitment, could build something that would outlast them both, something that would echo through time as a testament to what was possible when you opened your heart to unexpected possibilities. The tone-deaf cowboy and the widow who taught music lessons had found each other in a small California town in 1882, and their love had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. It was a love story written in piano keys and ranch land, in children and grandchildren, in music that carried across generations. And it was a love story that proved, beyond any doubt, that some things are meant to be, no matter how impossible they might seem at first. All it took was one person brave enough to ask for lessons, and another person kind enough to teach them, and the rest became history written in love.